comply with. And it has to do with the building, the scope of the work, the level of training and education of the employees. And then they have an inspector come every 5 years, and then they actually do a physical examination of the office and your records and your standard operating procedures.
And have you been through that examination? You called it every 5 years?
Yeah, we went in 2009 and then 2014, and then there's a reaccreditation process every year.
All right. And as we speak today, is your medical examiner's office accredited?
Yes.
In 2014, was it accredited?
Yes.
Who's up?
Amen.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit number M. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, that's my resume.
Is that your current CV? Hopefully.
Yes.
Very good. Your Honor, at this time we've moved State's Exhibit number M, marked for identification, as State's Exhibit next in order.
No objection to entering into evidence of distinguished.
Plea will be number 11.
Yeah. Okay, it'll be amended, number 11.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Doctor, I'm going to put the CV back up there because we're going to go through your training and background.
Okay.
Just in case you need it. As the medical examiner for the 6th district, what training and education have you received in order for you to perform those duties?
Well, I have a degree in medicine from the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio. Got that in 1990. I did a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology over 5 years, also in San Antonio. Then I came to Florida and trained at the Dade County Medical Examiner office in Miami. Finished that in 96. And then, let's see, I've been an associate medical examiner in Broward County, then associate medical examiner in Palm Beach County. Then I was a district medical examiner in Palm Beach County. Then I came here in December of 2000, became district medical examiner here. And I'm board certified in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology by the American Board of Pathology.
And are you licensed to practice medicine in the state of Florida?
Yes, Florida, Alabama, and Texas, actually.
During the years that you've either worked as an associate medical examiner or the medical examiner, how many autopsies have you performed?
It's got to be 5,000 by now, has to be. I don't keep an accurate tally, I probably dig through the computer, but then there's other offices too, so 5,000 is a good bet.
All right. And how many of those were gunshot wounds?
Ooh, I didn't know there was going to be a test today. Let's see, I think maybe it's a common cause of death, so over 1,000 I guess. It's pretty common when you have homicides and suicides together.
And how many times in either state or federal court have you testified and been allowed to render your opinion as to the cause and manner of death?
Hundreds.
And how many times have you testified in court, either state or federal, specifically allowed to render your opinion on the cause of death involving gunshot wounds?
Again, more on a lot. Dozens, 100, I don't know.
You're all right, tender Dr. Throckmorton as a forensic pathologist.
No objection, Your Honor.
He's qualified to testify about the subject matter for which he's being offered.
What I'd like to do, Doctor, before we get into your testimony, I'd like to go over some terms and concepts, if you will.
Okay.
In your profession, define an autopsy. What is it?
Well, it's a medical surgical procedure where You examine the external surfaces and the internal components of a body. And the word actually means to see for oneself. And the purpose of it is to try to find the cause of death.
What is a forensic pathologist?
Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of anatomic pathology. And forensic pathologist is someone who's been trained, hopefully by an accredited program, and is board certified in the field to basically practice pathology and apply it to non-natural and natural causes of death and testify in court.
Are there very specific opinions that are available to the medical examiner as to the manner of death?
Oh, right. Yeah, cause of death, there could be probably a billion different combinations, but manner of death, it's for medical statistical purposes. It goes on a death certificate. There's just 5 of them. And right now it's homicide, accident, suicide, natural, and they've changed undetermined to cannot be determined. Vital statistics changed that. So the 5th one now is cannot be determined.
I want to go through some medical terms that may come up during your testimony. Explain to us what a penetrating gunshot wound is.
Well, the way I use it is penetrating means it goes in, it doesn't come out. So I have a bullet, goes in, makes a hole, bullet stays in, that's a penetrating gunshot wound.
Explain to us the term intermediate range grazing gunshot wound.
Okay.
There's a lot of words there, but go for
Yeah,
it.
it may be a long answer. There's basically 3 types of gunshot wounds, generally speaking, when a forensic pathologist describes them, and it has to do with range. So you can have contact range, which is basically the muzzle of the gun pressed up against the skin. Then there's intermediate range, which is anywhere from a ½ inch to an inch away from the skin, all the way out to the maximum range where the firearm will cause powder tattooing or stippling. And that range varies with the ammunition and the type of gun. And then you have distant or undetermined range, such as a long range, rifle shot where the only thing that hits the skin is the bullet. There's no contact with the skin from the muzzle of the gun. There's no unburned or partially burned powder hitting the skin and embedding in the skin. It's just way far away. Or you can have it closer, but there's an intermediate target, such as heavy clothing, a doorway, a wall, so you can be within that intermediate range, but you have an intermediate target. That's where the undetermined comes in. Now, grazed gunshot wound is the other part of what you asked me, and that's kind of like what you see in movies, is where the bullet doesn't perforate or penetrate, it just grazes the skin and kind of cuts the skin, makes a trough.
Okay. We talked a little about gunshot wounds and leaving powder or unburned powder or particulates on the skin. Explain to us what stippling is.
Okay. Stippling is actually not powder on the skin, it's powder in the skin. So when a gun is fired, typically the most common type of powder is ball powder. It's shaped like little balls. And when you pull the trigger, hammer falls, firing pin impacts the primer. Primer sets off a burning reaction of the powder in the case, pushing the bullet out. So that expanding gas pushes the bullet out. Well, the bullet comes out. But along with the bullet, even sometimes ahead of the bullet, depending on the tightness of the barrel, you'll actually have little bits of partially burned or unburned powder come out. And certainly after the bullet, out comes flame and smoke and all these sometimes unburned powder, because a gun is not 100% efficient. It's dirty. So when the bullet comes out, you may have a bullet hole, but here comes all the powder and it embeds in the skin and it actually tattoos the skin. And if you have tattooing on your hand, you'll walk around with it for a couple of weeks.
Okay. In the event that in your profession, if you see the tattooing of the skin from the unburned powder or other particulates, can you use that in some manner to determine the muzzle to target distance, if you will, wherever the stippling took place?
In a range. Generally, my standard testimony is that it's not a contact wound, it's intermediate range, So based on my experience, it's anywhere from an inch to 18 and sometimes 24 inches away from the skin.
Does the particulates come out of the barrel and then impregnate it on the skin in a solid mass? Or is it like a shotgun shell, or depending on the choke on the shotgun, it's either tight or broad? What is it?
Right, it's kind of common sense if you have a bunch of little pellets coming out of the barrel of a gun. If you're closer, you're going to have a tighter, more dense pattern. In fact, it can look like just a gray paint job on the skin because they're all so tight together, it's almost a solid tattoo, like a ring around the wound. Then as you move away, the particles spread just like pellets out of a shotgun. And the amount of spread depends on the caliber, the length of barrel, the ammunition. It changes with each different possibility. And as you, but in general terms, as you get further away, it comes out in a cone shape and eventually becomes widened. And then as the muzzle gets further away from the skin, the powder lacks sufficient energy to stick in the skin. So at about 18 to 24 inches, the powder would just land on the skin and just fall away. So that's what's the limit of the tattooing. That's why there's an outer range. Obviously, you're not going to be able to powder tattoo somebody across the room. You're not going to be able to do it. Powder doesn't have the weight and the energy to hit the skin and get in it.
Okay. A couple other terms before we get to your testimony. Tell us the difference between anterior and posterior position.
Oh, that's a good one. Anterior is front, your face, chest, front of your legs. But it gets a little more complicated when you talk about the arms, the anatomic position, actually. Can I
That
stand
was
up?
my next question, so cover them both.
Okay. Stand up. This is the anatomic position. So your palms of your hands and the front part of your wrists and forearms is anterior. All of this is posterior. So it gets a little confusing when people are moving their arms around. It gets a little weird, but that's basically it.
Let's talk about this case. On January 14, 2014, a little after noontime, did you have an occasion to conduct an autopsy on one Chad Olson, a white male, 43 years of age?
Yes.
Judge, you
Yeah.
signed a stipulation as to manner, cause, and the identity of the individual.
That's true, and at this time, I'd like to read that stipulation with the court's permission.
Go ahead.
The undersigned counsel for the respective parties hereby stipulate and agree that the individual who was shot on January 13, 2014, inside Theater Number 10, Cobb Theater, at the Grove, 6333 Wesley Grove Boulevard, Wesley Chapel, Florida, is that of the victim in the above style case, Chad Wayne Olson, a human being, and that he is dead. That is the entire stipulation.
Thank you.
This is your copy, right?
This is filed, isn't it?
It's been filed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Was your office, the 6th District Medical Examiner's Office, notified on January 13, 2014 that a Chad Olson had been taken to the emergency room at the Florida Hospital in West Chapel?
Yes.
Is it your practice to dispatch an employee of yours to go to that location?
Oh, most often when a body is dead at the scene, we definitely go. It's hit or miss when they're at the hospital, but investigator Dustin Daly did go.
And I believe then by your comment that Mr. Olson then was pronounced dead at the hospital
Yes.
by Dr. Cottrell?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
All right. Was arrangements made for Mr. Olson's body to be transported to the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
Is it your practice at the 6th District Medical Examiner's Office to assign a unique number to each case that comes into the office?
Yes.
In this particular case, did your office assign the number 5140066 to the case involving Chad Olson?
Yes.
And was that number cross-referenced with Pasco Sheriff's Office number 14-001529?
Yes.
Prior to coming in the courtroom today, have you had a chance to review not only your autopsy report, but any investigative notes and notes from your autopsy?
Yes.
Were you able to review the photographs that were taken either by your investigator at the hospital or during the autopsy?
Yes.
And do you believe that some of those photographs will be helpful and aid you in explaining your testimony to the court?
Yes.
Did you assist the prosecutor in this case in selecting those photographs that you felt would aid you in explaining your testimony to the court?
Yes.
Approach the witness, Judge.
You may.
Let me show you what's been marked for identification purposes. Since I find that mark. As State's Exhibit number N for identification, and ask if you recognize those photographs.
Yes, these are photographs taken at our office, and these are photographs from our office.
And is the unique medical examiner's placard in all of those office photographs being
Judge, we don't have any objection
514066?
to having these photos introduced into evidence, whatever the prosecutor's ready.
Thank you.
Each one of these photographs has been identified for discussion purposes with the medical examiner's office number, and then preceding that is the frame number from the metadata that was taken off the camera. You see we have 013, 017, 022, and 033.
Yes.
So when we refer to the document, if we can be mindful to refer to the number on the photograph so the record is clear and we can cross-reference what you're talking about with the photograph. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, would you mind if I just stood here so we can both?
I don't mind.
All right, I greatly appreciate that.
You can reposition too, Mr. Michael,
Thank
if you need to.
Judge, we're not displaying the photograph.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is begin with your external examination of Mr. Olson at the autopsy. Did you weigh Mr. Olson?
Yes.
And what was the weight?
We recorded his weight at 205 pounds.
And did you determine the height?
Yes, we measured him at 76 inches.
What I'd like to do is refer to photograph 013 and discuss the external examination. Regarding photograph 013 and also 017, what wounds are we looking at there?
There's a gunshot wound on his, a little bit to the midline, a little bit to the left of the midline of his chest. And then above that and more to the midline is an abrasion that's probably related to the gunshot.
Did you take some measurements from the top of his head to orientate the wound on the body?
Yes.
And from the top of the head, what is the measurement to the wound?
16 and a half inches. It's centered 16 and a half inches below the top of the head.
And did you take a measurement from the level shoulders?
Yes, 7 and a half.
And from the midline?
A 1 and a half.
Explain how you took
1 and a quarter, excuse me.
Okay. And explain how you took those measurements.
Well, what I do is I take a straight edge ruler. If I need a yardstick sometimes. And with a gentleman this size, usually you need a longer ruler. And basically I just visualize the distance below the top of the head. I'm not using a tape measure, I'm using a hard ruler.
And why do you take the measurements from the head down?
Well, when my general rule of thumb is that if the wound is below the waist, I'll measure from the heel up. If the wound is above the waist, I'll measure from the head down. Generally, it's easier to measure a shorter distance. It's more accurate. Like I can measure the length of this page much easier than I can measure the length of the room. So I measure the shortest distance possible. And then you can always, as long as you've measured the height correctly, you can deduct and figure it out from the sole of the foot or the top of the head if it's in the leg or it's in the chest.
What I'd like for you to do is continue with your testimony using photographs 013, 017, and 018, and describe the wound for us. And from your description, what can you tell us about the wound?
Well, the wound is unusual, and it kind of goes along with one of the opinions I gave later on about the grazing wound. Like this is a 380, my understanding of the circumstances is a 380. And if a 380 bullet travels like a very well thrown football by a professional NFL quarterback, it's going to spiral perfectly generally. Certainly if it's a decent barrel and a decent gun made by a real manufacturer, it's going to fly straight. And it's going to make a hole in the skin. If it's coming in perpendicular to the skin, it's going to make a nice punched out hole, and then it's going to do whatever it does inside. This entry wound is what I call it's triangular shape, I describe it. It's got an eccentric abrasion. It's kind of weird shape. What this is an entry by a tumbling bullet. This bullet is wobbling. It's not flying straight.
Okay. And from what is it about the wound other than the triangular shape that leads you to that conclusion? Is there any other tearing or splitting of the skin?
There's a little bit of eccentric abrasion, like if you were looked at it like a clock face, maybe at 4 o'clock, so it's kind of abraded the skin. And then there's an abrasion that's completely separate from the wound, up a little higher, about 1.5 inches away, and a little bit more toward the midline. That's probably also related to the gunshot wound, but maybe a piece of cast-off flying debris from the grazed gunshot wound that he had that probably impacted his chest, the bullet impacted before hitting his chest.
All right. Now, once the bullet impacted the chest, did you then make a determination the path of the bullet inside the body?
You can use the x-ray very reliably to kind of, look at the path of the bullet. Well, it hits his rib, and then it pretty much goes straight back. It goes a little bit to the right of the midline. So maybe it goes about this far left to right, and then it ends up in one part of it ends up in his heart, and the other part ends up in his lung, his right lung. So it's pretty much front to back, maybe a little bit of deflection or travel from the right to the left.
Now, is that from the bullet tumbling, hitting the rib, or what? Or can we say that's the direction of the bullet? Is it a deflection is what I'm getting at?
Generally, bullets will fly straight, even in the body generally. There could be 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of deflection involving, since it did hit bone. There could be a slight deflection because it hit the wrist, but we're talking, probably less than 5 degrees, certainly.
Okay. Did you actually find pieces of the bullet inside the heart?
Yes, there was, the way I describe it, I have a yellow bullet jacket. Bullets are created by having a lead core wrapped in a copper jacket, and most defense ammo is hollow point bullets, so when they go in, they're supposed to kind of break apart. So I found the jacket sometimes will separate away from the core, and you'll find the jacket, and then deeper in you'll find the lead core, and that's what happened here.
And you indicated that the bullet traveled front to back. Did you determine a distance?
Yes, typically what I like to do is measure how deep the total wound track is, and that's from the surface of the skin to where I find the deepest part is 5.5 inches. So in the chest, that's pretty good distance. Maybe it's about this far.
We're going to come back to these, but we need to cover another topic. I want you to refer to photograph 022 and 033. And first, let's talk about the wound on 022. Where is that wound located?
Well, it's basically on the top part of where the hand meets the wrist. And it grazes right across the top of his hand or wrist, right where I'm pointing right here.
And did you measure it?
Yes.
And what is the measurement?
I have it, it's oval shaped, and it's a 2 by 3.5 centimeter wound.
And is that described as a grazed gunshot wound?
Yes.
And based on the photograph, or actually you did the examination, what is it about the wound that leads to your opinion that it is a grazed gunshot wound?
Well, if I was publishing a textbook, this would be the picture I'd use for a grazed gunshot wound. It's got a lot of elements that...
Tell us what they are.
Well, you have it's almost common sense. You can imagine a bullet flying across human skin. It's going to create a cut or a trough. And when the skin is cut, sometimes the skin is under tension in that area. So even though the bullet may be 0.38 inches in diameter, 3/8 is 0.38 inches, the wound ends up wider because the tension of the skin cuts the skin and kind of opened. And also, the wound, so all the characteristics of grazed gunshot wound alone, but also the directionality is clear. When, if you can imagine human skin being basically cut by a flying blunt bullet, there's going to be tears and tags. That's what we call them. The tears are going to be the tears in the skin are going to be directed outward in the direction of the bullet. The tags, like pieces of skin that look like little peninsulas of skin, like little Floridas sticking in toward the wound, those are called tags. They're pointing where the bullet came from. And he has some very, very good tears and tags at the sides of the wound that point in the tags point in the direction of the bullet, the tears point in the direction the bullet is going. It's perfect.
Now, we've had some testimony, so I want you to assume for the rest of your testimony that there was only one shot fired in this case.
Okay?
And that one shot did strike Mr. Olson. Okay? Now, in dealing with the wound, can you tell us whether or not any bone was damaged or perforated in the wrist area in that wound?
Not in this wound, just soft tissue.
I just can't remember the number of the picture. I want you to refer to picture 0333. Is that a different view of photograph 0222 where the wound is?
Yes, that's the 33 is the posterior surface of the right hand and wrist.
Okay. And would you describe what is significant to you when you're dealing with a gunshot wound? What is significant about the condition of the backside of Mr. Olson's hand in that photograph?
It has a gunshot wound stippling.
Okay. Based on our previous conversations regarding stippling, and remember we talked about the cone and how it can get tighter, closer, and it comes out.
Yes.
Is there any broad range or any range that a medical examiner can give regarding the muzzle to target distance from stippling on the skin?
Well, you can only do it based on experience. Nobody's volunteering to have themselves shot, and you really don't get the same kind of reaction out of pig's feet or leather or anything. It's got doesn't really work. This wound and this stippling is not 1 inch away. It's not 2 inches away. It's probably, if you were to ask me to ballpark it, I would probably go with 4 to 15, could be anywhere in there.
In dealing with the stippling, when you conducted the external examination, did you notice any stipplings from the knuckles to the fingers?
No, and the picture shows it quite nicely too. It kind of ends on the back of the hand and it ends up here a little bit up on the forearm too.
Okay.
So there's your range of stippling here to here.
Based on you gave us a very broad range of determination of distance, 4 inches to 15 inches. Is there a reason that is, let me back up. What could account for the lack of stippling from the knuckles to the fingers? That's a better way to ask it.
Well, it could be the actual edges of the, there's a cone of stippling that occurs with these wounds, so the fingers and then also, of course, the higher forearm are out of the range of stippling. That could be one reasonable explanation. The others could be that the fingers are flexed at the metacarpals, right like this, or that the arm is at an angle or the hand is at the angle where these really don't have, they're not presented to the powder well enough for it to impact, something like that.
Now what I would like to do is combine the two wounds. So let me get on the record to the photographs that you're going to be relying on in this discussion. We're going back to the photographs dealing with the chest wound, which is photographs 013, 017, and 018. And what I'd like for you to do, also using the photograph of the wrist wound, 022 and 033, assuming the fact that there's one gunshot, can you tell us whether or not one gunshot could have caused both those wounds?
Yes, and I noted that in my autopsy report. It's consistent with one gunshot wound. Particularly the entry of the chest looks like it's gone through an intermediate target. And the intermediate target is at least this Graves gunshot wound. His wrist is the intermediate target.
All right. When you conducted the autopsy of Chad Olson, did you have knowledge that his wife, Nicole Olson, had also been injured by a single gunshot?
I had heard that she had a hand wound. That's it. That's all the information I had at the time of the post.
All right. Prior to coming in the courtroom today, have you had an opportunity to review the photographs of Mrs. Olson's gunshot wound?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit O for identification, and ask if you would look at these photographs and tell me whether or not those are the photographs that you reviewed regarding that was represented to you as being the gunshot wound of Nicole Olson.
Yes, these are the photographs.
And would those photographs aid you in explaining your testimony as far as how Mrs. Olson received her wound in relation to the wound on her husband's chest and wrist?
Yes.
At this time, I would move State's Exhibit number O for identification next in order.
No objection.
Those haven't been previously reviewed?
These are my photographs. And you have stuff for
What are they, 12?
the 12.
13, I think.
Yeah, that goes on there somewhere.
And how many are there? To composite.
Right. And we're not displaying.
Your Honor, I apologize, I didn't hear the court. Did the court recognize some of the photos as previously being entered into evidence by the defense?
Well, it doesn't really matter.
No, I know, I just didn't hear
No,
what the court said.
I forgot that they were by you guys, whatever was admitted. There was undoubtedly some similar, if not the same ones, but this will be states 12, right?
I put it in the other ones of Mr. Olson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think these are.
Have you agreed to those?
Yeah, those are omitted.
And then I've written it down. So that is 13.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, they were in the investigation. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Thogorn, if you would, we're not going to display all of those photographs. What I'd like for you to do, now that you have a chance to review them, and you have the characteristics of the wound, kind of in your head, would you go ahead and just use your own hand and explain exactly where the wound is and how the wound traveled, and whatever opinion you can conclude as to the path of the wound through Mrs. Olson's, I'll call it hand, but fingers.
Okay, I see the date on this. I know that this is a couple of days old, so she's got a lot of swelling from the injury. Basically, in my opinion, based on this, she's got stippling on her hand. She's got powder tattooing on her hand too, not as intense as Mr. Olson's. She's got a bullet hole that goes through her ring finger. It looks like she's got a little graze from the bullet on the top distal or distant part of her pinky finger. And it looks like it goes through and through the ring finger. And the stippling is on this side, so I think her hand is held something similar to this. There's all sorts of variations, but it's not like this. It's not like that. It's basically like this, and the pinky's got a little grazing abrasion on it, so it's coming in just about like that.
Okay. And you mentioned that she had some stippling on it, but not as much stippling on Mr. Olson's backside of his hand.
That's correct.
And orientating her hand in the path of the bullet, would that indicate to you that her hand is in front of Mr. Olson's wrist or in back of Mr. Olson's wrist?
Well, most likely her hand, his wrist is very intensely tattooed. Hers is less so. So based upon what we previously discussed, it's most likely that her hand is behind his wrist. So he's intermediate target number 1, she's intermediate target number 2, and then there's the chest wound.
Now, once we get past the wrist, can a medical examiner anatomically place the rest of the body in position where that hand was at the time it was shot?
Only thing I can do is I can trace a reasonably straight path for the bullet. And knowing that, I can place his wrist in certain areas and I can place her hand in certain areas, but if you can use your imagination, all I've got is that wrist, the hand, and the chest. And any combination where the stippling lines up, anatomically you can place them, but you do it in context. There's obviously limits. Mr. Olson's not hanging from the ceiling upside down, and the shooter is not laying down on the ground. You have to put it in the context, but there are some variations of where you can place them.
Now, based on the way the body is hinged together, if you will, you talked about the variations. Is the way the body joints bend and move, does that place additional limitations on the possibilities of where her body was?
To a degree. I mean, to a degree. We're not 10 men from the Wizard of Oz where we're all stiff. But there's some flexibility, but there's certain limitations that we have. I can think of 3 to 5 reasonable scenarios where the bullet could have traversed these areas and caused the exact same wounding.
And what would those be?
Well, I think that when Mr. Olson was shot, the bullet's flying into his chest. Reasonably, let's say we already said there may be a little deflection, 1, 2, 3, certainly not more than 5 degrees. So here's the bullet, places his wrist here, and her hand is somewhere in here. I can't do it because obviously I don't have the right hand, right? But something to this effect. I need more than one person to model it.
Well, I'm available. Come on down.
You want to be with C?
Sure. Would a rod help you with this?
Yes. Okay. The wound is basically coming in about right here. And so the bullet's generally going to fly straight. This is basically where the wound is. Now, bend over at the waist. This is wherever his body is positioned, lean back way as far as you can. So that's all I can say, is this is the path of the bullet. And depending on the position of his torso, it changes the position of the gun. Now, same thing with the wrist.
Got my jacket.
Oh, sorry. So it's coming right through here. But where's the hand? Where's the wrist? All lines up fine, right? Now where is his wife's hand? Somewhere right about here, but also it could be here, anywhere along this area. But if he moves his hand closer, they're really close. If he moves his hand away, they could be really far away. So the bullet's basically flying like a little bit, we got a little off, like this, but you can see the possibilities with where his hand can be, and you can see the possibilities where her hand can be. That's all I can do anatomically.
Thank you. The position of her hand in between Mr. Olson's hand and the chest, does that in any way account for the amount of stippling on her hand?
Well, yes, hers is less, much less than his. So I feel like her hand was behind his wrist, further away from the gun muzzle. I mean, I feel very comfortable saying that.
Now, we talked about the trajectory of the bullet, and you used the rod as far showing us how the path as the body moves, because it's relatively short distance and straight, it's going to move, right?
Well, if you're wondering where the gun is upstream from the bullet path. And no matter, wherever you put the body, that's where that gun is. So that's the position thing. Is he sitting in the seat straight? The gun's right there. If he's leaning back in the seat, it's up here. If he's bending over at the waist, it's down on the floor. So if he turns his torso to the right, or to the left, right, it's moving, the gun is necessarily over in that area. And again, you have to put it in context.
When we talk about and ask a medical examiner to attempt to position a body that was involved in shooting, are you constrained by the, I guess I'll call them the known circumstances and what witnesses say? Known circumstances being, like in this case, it's a theater, there's short distance, there's chairs, there's artifacts in the way, obstructions. That's what I mean.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can give you the anatomic path of the bullet, but then you correlate that with the circumstance and you narrow in the possible scenarios. I mean, there's, if you have a completely unknown shooting circumstance, those scenarios are very large. But if you have witnesses, film, a set thing where people are saying what occurred, you can rule out what's not possible, but then you can say, well, this situation is possible, this is plausible, this is good. So you're basically narrowing your focus on the possible scenarios of the shooting.
And doing that, in the event there is an obstruction, like in this particular case, a seat back of a chair, if there's no bullet hole through the seat back and there's only one shot, would that be a circumstance that could be used in an attempt to determine the trajectory and where the shot came from, since there was no bullet hole through the solid object?
Right, that's what I like about my work. A lot of it's common sense. If there's an object between the gun and the decedent, and there's no hole in the object, then the bullet traveled over or around the object, not through it. So it probably came over the top, or it went through the crack, but generally it didn't go through.
Now, regarding the position of Mr. Olson, having those same constraints that we just discussed in mind, are you able to place Mr. Olson's body in any position that would be consistent with the wound track, knowing the artifacts and everything that are in the area?
Sure, there's a couple of possibilities.
Would a chair and a stick and a rod, can you come down and show us?
Yes.
All right, let's do that. I'm going to let you manipulate the rod. It's going to be a one-person show. And what I'd like for you to do is give us the different scenarios, and I'll just step out of the way and which the wound track would be consistent with a particular body position.
Okay. Well, it's kind of like the same scenario we had before, but here's about where the wound is, would be on me, on my chest. And for the purpose of the model, I mean, I'm 5'11", he's 6'4", so he's got 5 inches on me.
Plus shoes.
Plus shoes, well, we both have shoes, so anyway.
There you go.
I'm a little short for him. So let's we have to move the wound up to about right here, about 5 inches, give or take. So the wound is here, and it's pretty much, I can orient it where it's front to back and slightly left to right. So if I'm standing up, there's the gun, if the gun's in that range. If it's on the other side of the seat, the gun's here, if I'm standing straight. If I'm bending over just slightly, you can see the wound still lines up. Oh, and my wrist is here, and the gun makes it over the seat. Now, obviously, I can't be bending over like this. Guns would be going through the seat. Now, to get range, give you an idea of range, I could be doing this. That would work. This. I could be doing this. It would all work, but there's limits. I think based on the seating and circumstance, he's not turned this way. He's not turned this way. He's probably not doing this. Somewhere in here, if the gun is right at seat level, I got to be doing this, or the gun's got to be pointing up, or I'm here, this would work. And then range of fire, the gun could probably be, depending on where the wrist is here, the gun can be further back. It could be closer if the wrist is closer. Anywhere along here. This is what I'm dealing with what I mean anatomic findings in context. Those are the possibilities, generally. Maybe there's something I haven't thought of, but those are the general ones.
Well, based on the artifacts that we see and the wound track, do you have an opinion as to whether or not when Mr. Olson was shot that he was standing fully erect?
Well, if he's standing fully erect, you've got the gun. Well, let's move up a little bit. Put the gun a little bit closer. He's standing full erect, and somebody's sitting. Depending on, they may have to be holding the gun like this to get a straight shot. If he's bending over slightly, you've got somebody holding it low but pointing it up. But see, as I manipulate my wrist, go ahead and let go. I can make it work, but you just have to, it depends on the manipulation of the wrist and the gun. The gun, when I move, the gun moves. If I move closer, the gun, this works. Even 2 knees in seat. My knees hurt when I kneel on this, but I could be here. I could be doing this. I could be doing this and anything else. But my wrist and arm are here. That's where they are. And the wife of the decedent's hand is somewhere in here. So maybe it precludes him being way back here with her hand reaching here. Maybe he's probably much closer to the seat, maybe kneeling in the seat.
Thank you. You take a seat. What I'd like to do is discuss with you the use of a blunt object to cause injuries to the face.
Okay.
That's a very broad topic. Okay? Now, clerk, do I have that cell phone? And, I brought it up there. Let me show you what's been marked as exhibit number 33 in evidence. Ask you to look at that. I know you haven't seen it before, but let's ask you to look at that.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. Give it back to the clerk. I want to show you defense exhibit number 27. Give you a moment to look at that.
Okay.
When a blunt object strikes, I'll call it the face or the head area, well, let me start over. I want you to assume that from approximately 30 inches away, that an object that weighs about like that phone that you had in your hand is thrown and it strikes the head of a human being an individual who is 70 plus years of age. Can't tell you how much force, how fast, but in the event that an object weighted like that phone is hurled from that distance, would you expect to see some sort of indication that that object hit the individual, especially if it hit the individual in the glasses area?
Only if it was, well, you have to really chunk it. I mean, you can certainly hit him in the glasses area and leave no mark at all because you're tossing it or not throwing it with sufficient force. But I mean, if you really heaved a phone, you could injure somebody. You could leave a mark, a welt or something.
All right. And if you continue with the factual scenario that it was reported that the force was such that the person was dazed by the impact, but that leads you to believe that you would see some sort of injury to the face.
Maybe. I mean, dazed is a very subjective term. You know, sometimes I feel dazed when I don't get enough calories. But, you know, what does dazed mean? I'm assuming that what that means is they're really getting hit. If they're really getting hit, you're going to have some sort of mark probably. And it's usually when you get hit by something, it's going to be on the bone. If you see a mark, if you get hit in the cheek, it's kind of squishy. But if you get hit in the brow or the chin or the bridge of the nose, that's where you get the mark because you've got skin under bone. That's where you get the skin injuries that last.
All right. I'd like you to direct your attention to Defense Exhibit 27, specifically to the left eyelid. And what do you see there?
I don't really see. I see maybe that eyelid's a little redder than that one, but it's not very impressive at all.
Okay. How fragile is the skin of the eyelid?
Well, it's about the most fragile skin of your face. Maybe the lining of your nose or maybe your cheek, the buccal mucosa may be a little bit more fragile, but to give you an idea, if somebody gets strangled, that tissue in there is so fragile that actually the blood vessels in there break just from having the venous outflow of the head occluded by hands or a ligature sometimes. So the eyelid, the tissue around the eye, the vessels of the eye, the white of the eye, the conjunctiva, they're very fragile.
Can the eyelid be, I'm sorry, can an abrasion type wound, if you will, be caused of the eyelid by the constant rubbing by one's finger?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can make your eyes red by rubbing them. I think that's almost, I mean, I know that from living a life of normalcy. But yeah, if you rub your eye, you're going to make it red. You can make it bloodshot. Yeah.
How about the eyelid itself?
Sure.
Now, Mr. Reeves in this picture is wearing glasses, right?
Right.
In the event that an object was thrown at Mr. Reeves, and it did cause an injury behind his glasses, how can you account for the glasses being there and that injury being there, if that is true?
From the phone?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just say that I have a phone chunked at me. Being a longtime glass wearer, these glasses have saved my eyes numerous times, but phones flying at you with sufficient force to hit you here, of all the places on the face that's least likely to be injured, of any place, nose, mouth, forehead, anything, eyelid would be the last. Because number one, it's surrounded by bony tissue, and the reason it's sunken in, our eyes are in our heads instead of outside protruding like a French poodle or something, is for protection. He has I'm assuming it's a plastic lens, and I'm assuming he wore it when he was there. How am I getting to the eyelid and not, if I'm hitting it really hard enough where I actually hit the eyelid some magical way, I'm going to have bridge of the nose injuries, brow injury. I mean, try to do that without your glasses, you'd have a real hard time. I just injured my eye, but with the glasses on, I don't. All I did was smudge my glasses.
And what if the frames of the glasses was what's known as these flexible glasses?
That would be good. They wouldn't be damaged, but you'd still have the other surrounding the eyes. Even if you had one of those old World War II German monocles, just a one, or that you stick in your eyelid wouldn't be injured, but all around your eye, you don't even have a frame, around your eye would be injured from the blunt impact. But of all places on the face, when you're wearing glasses, that would be the least likely to be injured.
There's been testimony that picture was taken approximately 2 hours after the shooting incident and after allegedly Mr. Reeves was struck by a cell phone. After a 2-hour period, what would you expect to see?
If it really, again, I'm not even sure there's an injury here, but let's say that he didn't have his glasses on and somehow the phone got through there, or his glasses are made of Jell-O or something, and there was an injury. You expect some swelling, some sort of thing. When your eye gets hit, generally you're going to have some swelling, purple. I'm looking at this picture and I'm really I'm acknowledging that maybe that the left eye is a little redder, tiny bit, but I don't even know if I'd appreciate it if I was to do an autopsy or look at him medically. I don't even know if I'd appreciate it as an injury.
Well, what does that mean you wouldn't appreciate it?
Well, when you look at people in general, whether you're doing a physical exam or an autopsy, there's going to be like one eyelid may not be exactly the same color. One side of the face may be a little lower than the other. One eye may be a little lower than the other. Their faces aren't symmetrical. They're not monochromatic. So I'm looking at this picture. If you didn't tell me I'm looking for an injury, I wouldn't even know I would see an injury.
All right. In this particular case, we're going to shift gears. In this particular case, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of death?
Yes.
You've already explained to us.
Right, oh, it's homicide, and that's based on, manner of death's based on circumstances, and the circumstances are pretty clear. One person shot another, it's a homicide.
Hang on a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm going to pass the witness, but may I have a few minutes and I'll get the exhibits back to the clerk.
Yes, please.
So she feels more comfortable with us walking around with them.
Indeed.
There's two of them. Go get the back. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Michaels?
Afternoon, Doctor.
Afternoon.
Let's go back to that large photo you were looking at, if we may.
Okay.
Thank you. Start here and work our way backwards.
Okay.
This is Defense Exhibit 27. It's that big picture you were looking at.
Yes.
I'm sure you remember it.
Yes.
All right. Now, first of all, and I remember this was a line from what you told us when we talked to you at the deposition, kind of your bailiwick is not the living, but the deceased.
That's correct. Although sometimes people show me living people, my statutory duties are confined strictly to the decedents. Just people that die in certain, not all decedents, but just certain ones.
And in terms of the photograph, basically you see in it what anybody else might see. And what I mean by that is you would depend on the photographer to capture any sort of injury for you to make a proper evaluation.
Right. I mean, anytime you have a photograph, lighting or lack thereof, angle, stuff like that, it'd be much better to actually see them at that point, and say, do you see an injury? It'd be much superior.
Right. And so in terms of diagnosing an injury of some sort, that would certainly be something that you would do as a medical doctor in person as opposed through a photograph.
Yeah, my testimony was merely, if you showed me this photograph and say, what's wrong with it? I don't think I'd say, wow, his left eye's injured. I don't think I'd say that. But it could be that it's due to, the photograph is not capturing it as well as perhaps it really was.
Okay. So we can agree in terms of any sort of medical opinion as to whether there was any injury to Mr. Reeves' left eye. You can't opine as to that, correct?
I can't opine. I can opine as based on the picture, what I see in the picture, but I don't have a time machine, so obviously I can't see him live. It would be better if I could see him at the time.
And certainly you didn't examine him at the time.
No.
Nor did your staff take the photographs, because certainly you depend on the photographs that your staff and photographs that are taken at the medical examiner's office, more so than, for instance, something taken at a hospital.
Right, well, we actually don't have authority to run around taking pictures of living people.
Right.
Unless it's pertinent to cause of death.
No, I understand.
Then it could be. But I don't see how, the specifics of the altercation aren't going to alter cause and manner, so I can't think of a single time we've actually taken pictures of living people
Right.
that have to do with cause and manner. I don't know. Have to think about that.
But I mean, in terms of the bodies that you examine, you would depend on your examination and your photographs as opposed to a forensic technician's photograph.
The photographs that we take in the office are helpful, and usually they're really good. And obviously, when I look at the body face to face, it's much better.
Okay. So in this case, we agree that in terms of an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Reeves was truly injured, you have no medical opinion as to that.
I could say based on this picture, I don't see a significant injury. How about that?
We can agree with that.
Yes.
Because you aren't rendering a medical opinion.
I'm rendering an opinion, a medical opinion about this photograph right here.
Okay, but not the individual because you haven't examined it.
Not, let's say this, I don't really know how to answer that. That's a tough one. Based on the photograph only, but it would be better if I had a time machine and go back and look at his eye.
All right, let's go to the daze. You mentioned daze, you said that's kind of a subjective thing. So certainly if somebody was dazed, that might not show up on the photograph, correct?
Right, right. Oh, I'm not saying he could have been hit with a cell phone, for sure, and he could have been dazed. But again, I don't deal with people that are dazed. I deal with people that are injured so badly that they're actually not working anymore.
Okay, that's fair enough. May I?
Sure.
May I, Judge?
Yes.
And in terms of body positioning, again, you know, as long as you line up everything and you can configure it, then that's a possibility in terms of gun location and where the individuals were, the hands, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, it's much, if you want to know the position, just look at the anatomics and whatever theory comes out, the anatomics could refute it, but they confirm multiple different other ones too.
Right.
There are certain things that just aren't possible based on the wound, but then there are probably 4 or 5 scenarios that would probably line up with everything.
Now, in this case, you saw Mrs. Olson's hand. I think the first time you saw was probably when Mr. Escobar and I showed you some photographs of it in our deposition.
Yeah, I think so. I think you guys showed me like the top part of the hand. I think that's the first time I saw it, yes.
All right. And so now you've gotten an opportunity to look again at photos of the hand. We can agree that in terms of where the hand was actually placed, you can't pinpoint where Mrs. Olson's hand was placed in terms of whether or not it was on Mr. Olson's chest.
No, I can't.
In other words, it's possible that it was. You
Sure.
can't say. In terms of Mr. Olson's hand, because of the stippling and the graze wound you described, you made a kind of a hand where your fingers were retracted a bit, and that's because of the lack of stippling on his fingers.
Well, his hand, to be fair to everything, his hand could have been like this, but this is just the outer range of the stippling, or his hand's like this, or his hand's in any other position where his fingers are flexed,
Okay.
and then distance. All these things are possible.
Or his hand could have been in a fist.
Could have been like that, could have been in a fist, could have been thumbs up, could have been a peace sign, hitchhiking, could have been almost anything.
But could have been in a fist.
Absolutely.
In terms of the positioning on the chair that you were provided had a seat that was out. So there was a seat bottom.
Yes.
And so that would constrain your movements in terms of positioning of the firearm as it relates to the chest wound.
Yes, good point. The seats on those seats, I don't know, but movie theater seats sometimes flip up when you get out of them most irritatingly and dump your candy on the floor. But that would allow him to get much closer.
Okay.
But again, he can't be standing upright unless the person's kind of shooting up. And
Okay.
he has to be bent over, or if he's standing up straight, you got to have your gun up.
Well, even if the individual with the firearm is seated, if the angle of the firearm is slightly up because it's a front-to-back wound, the individual with the chest wound would have to be bent over at the waist. That's what you showed us.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And then if there was no seat bottom, that individual with the chest wound could be closer
Yes.
and bent over at the waist.
Yes.
So unlike where you showed, where this was the back of the seat before, I guess that's what it was supposed to represent, you had the seat bottom there, and so you were motioning this way. Without the seat bottom, you could get closer and line it up the same way.
Yes, you could get closer because that chair, if you fold the seat up, it would collapse. So
Well, that would
the
be-
movie theater seat, if he flipped it up, he could be standing, but he could be bent over a little bit, gun aimed up, sure.
Okay, so we can agree that the wound path and the stippling is consistent with Mr. Olson closer than you showed us. It's consistent with that, bent over at the waist with a fist.
Anatomically, yes, it's consistent with that.
Okay, I don't have anything else, thank you.
Any redirect?
Yes. In dealing with the anatomical position of Mr. Olson, you indicated to Mr. Michaels that Mr. Olson, if he was shot standing up, then I think you put your arm like this, right? The gun would have to be up.
Well, if he's standing straight up and I'm sitting, you'd almost have to have the gun like this, up, because the gun's got to be kind of flat with the ground. Well, the theater's sloping, but with the earth, how about that? Parallel with the surface of the earth. But if Mr. Olson's bent over, you could line it up, drop the hand, raise the gun, and he's bent over slightly, you could line it up.
All right, well,
He could be squatting down and the gun could be straight.
pull him back over here, please. Use me as the model of what we're talking about. Put one arm.
Yep.
And we're not talking about height, we're just talking about how everything has to line up.
Right like this. So if he's straight and I'm sitting, he's standing, I'm like this, bend over a little bit. Suddenly my hand can be down a little bit more. But if he's squat down and this is good, it works, but stand up, I've got to have the gun up more. So depending on what you guys find, these are the scenarios that would fit anatomically.
All right. So in this particular case, it would be a scenario of sitting in a chair, shot with him like this,
I have
right?
to be down a little bit.
All right. Or up like this.
I have
He'd
to
have,
be really
right.
tall.
All right. Or like this.
Yep,
All right. Or like this.
yep.
Right.
I'd have to be, if you're up like this, you line it up, you have to be bent over. If the gun is pointed up, you gotta be bent over.
Because you were talking about a straight track, so it has to be low.
Yeah, raise it up a little bit more, bend over a little less, squat a little bit. I mean, people are so rubbery. They've got knees, hips, the back can do this, so there's so many things you can do to line it up.
All right, so go back to that position. So if we're here, person sitting in the chair, in order to go straight in,
Yep. That would work?
okay. But you would see that it has to go as straight as a line as it can be. It can't be at a 45-degree angle
No.
either way.
No.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
Yes, I believe he's needed elsewhere.
Yes, later in the week, I think.
Oh, okay.
Tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doc. You're free to go.
We have no other witnesses for the evening, Judge.
I'm glad to hear that. Are there any matters we need to address before we adjourn?
Judge, we're going to go get those excerpts from that cross, and we'll have the excerpts and a memorandum for the court tomorrow morning.
Okay. Mr. Martin, you have a list of witnesses?
We do, but we've been calling witnesses, and some witnesses have had doctor's appointments because we've gone so late. So we are, hopefully I will have that on my desk. It is 6 o'clock. I will give Mr. Rukoff Shaw an email before 7 o'clock. But I have to confirm witnesses because we're struggling to, well, we're not struggling, we're trying to get them to adjust their schedule. So we'll give them a list within the hour.
Very good. All right, then we'll reconvene at 9.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well done, everybody. Be in recess till 9 o'clock.